Hey guys, Darren Kelly, coach of Position Pods, and welcome back to another episode of the club preview series for the 2025 AFL Print Fantasy Preseason. On today's episode, we are talking about the Melbourne Demons. Let's get into today's video.
All the pain.
So the Melbourne Demons had a pretty awful 2024, finishing 14th after finishing 4th in the 2023 season. So a big fall from grace, finishing in top 4 the year prior, all the way down to nearly the bottom 4. There's a lot of speculation with what's going on off field. We've heard a few things here and there with the likes of Clayton Oliver and Petrarca clearly not happy with drug scandals and whatnot. But it's hard to sort of look at that side of things too much. We've got to just look at it as an individual prospect and just go from there. So what am I expecting from them in 2025? So I'm expecting them to continue to decline. I expect them to drop into the bottom 4. Just when I'm looking at their team, I'm like, yes, they've got some really star-studded players. You're talking like your Olivers, you're talking about your Petrarcas, even your Gorns. You got some really good star players. But then you look at the rest of the team, and it's really just they're no big names. So they're probably one of the more lacking teams in terms of their depth. I know they only won a premiership only 4 years ago, but I think a lot has changed, and a lot of their really quality players have either dropped off in performances or either left the club. So I'm expecting them to drop into the bottom 4 this year, and possibly even further than that, with West Coast or North Melbourne looking to improve this year. So it's going to be a lot to deal with for them, and their coach is really under pressure, and I think he'll be lucky to get through the season unless they can turn it around and really get things going again. So big year for Melbourne. But in terms of fantasy, which we're all here to talk about, they have no opening round bye. So I don't know why I say it like that. Opening round. So, which is pretty rare for what we've been speaking about. I've done 10 of these episodes now, and 7 of the 10 clubs have had the opening round. So it's quite rare. So that's something to consider when you're looking at picking one of these players. Obviously, a lot of players in this team are looking to be picked, particularly Clayton Oliver. He is very high owned this preseason, so he is one that's very high much on the list. But before we get into that, I really want to quickly run through the ins and outs of the club. So for the ins, the only thing that they really brought in was Harry Sharp, and that was from Brisbane, and that was just a very not one I'm looking too hard into fantasy wise. He really hasn't shown a huge heap. He's been around for 4 seasons and probably played all of maybe 20 or 30 games, so not a huge sample size, and a lot of those have been subs. So one that you could put on the watch list, but nothing that significant for me, and I'm not even sure if he breaks into the best 22 at this point in time. And the only other inclusion they had was Tom Campbell, so that would more than likely just be a backup ruckman for the likes of Max Gawn. So that's something that we're going to consider when we select Max Gawn, which not many people are doing at the moment, but we will discuss that pretty shortly. For the outs for their team, you got Alex Neil-Bullen, who was traded to Adelaide, and then they had a bunch of retirees. Angus Brayshaw with that concussion, he had to retire, unfortunately. Ben Brown retired, and Lockie Hunter also retired as well. So those last 3 probably weren't a huge factor in last year's. I know Lockie Hunter only played like 2 games or something like that. Ben Brown was in and out of the side, but really couldn't get anything consistent, and we all know about the story of Angus Brayshaw, who unfortunately had to retire due to concussion issues. So very unfortunate for him, but really Alex Neil-Bullen is the major one. That takes up a midfield spot, which they were using. I think he averaged like 20% CBA, so he was sort of used heavily as more of a forward than a midfielder, but he often had times where he would take up 60-70% time in the midfield when others weren't there. In terms of the draft, Melbourne headed to the draft with pick 6 and pick 11, so picked up some pretty handy rookies in Harvey Langford and Xavier Lindsay. if that's how you say it. Probably butchered it, but we'll find out. So now let's get into some players that are really on my watch list for 2025. So we've got to start at the top, and sorry, don't mean to look at that. Max Gorn is obviously, you got to start at the top. He is priced at 111.8, so that means he's roughly 1.15 million. So it's going to cost you a pretty hefty price. I think he's the fourth highest rated player in the fantasy game. So he had a massive year. Considering what we picked him up for at the start of last year, where he was only at 92, we all know he was going to go much better than that. But to break into the 110s was probably a bit of a stretch, I would have thought. Even though we have seen it previously when he has been solo ruck. So, yeah, just casually coming back into his prime, back into his best fantasy season at the prime age of 32 is kind of ridiculous. You think he would have had his heights, you would think that he'd start to relax a little bit more, but being in the later stages of his career, when that he just carries really, really hard and he just racks up the ball like no other. Like I said, it's just all due to that solo ruck role. He just haven't seen that for him in a few years, with the the likes of Luke Jackson being in the side previously and whatnot. So it's something that we want to see, and even Brody Grundy the year prior as well. So I expect him to continue at this sort of range, probably decrease slightly, just because he is getting older. Melbourne declining more and more. They either going to rely on him a little bit more, and that could potentially cause some more issues. But when I'm looking into the stats, he had a massive first half of the season. I'll show you his numbers. He just went absolutely ballistic. Look at those numbers. So that he averaged 121 in that first half. So in those 13, 14 games, where 7 of those scores are above 120, and even there's 4 over 140 there. So he's a massive captain option. When he's on his game, he is a massive captain option. And if you didn't start him last year, it was a rough watch. Luckily for me, I did start him, and I did captain him a lot of the time, so that worked out really well. But he really fell off in the second half, and that was really due to like a bit of an ankle injury. He had a few tougher matchups, particularly here and there. You're talking about Oscar McInerney, and then you've got Briggs as well. That's particularly where he scored quite badly. You could probably excuse the one coming back from injury. This was the 71 was the injured game where he only played 3/4 of the game, so wasn't on for a huge score, but definitely wasn't right. I think he injured it early on in the game, just played through until he couldn't really handle it anymore. So you could probably say his value when you look at what he was capable of before his injury at 120. You could say that he is value, and he potentially could be a cheaper option for we're all talking about this set and forget rucks at the moment, where a lot of people are picking Cherry, and then it's like who's your R2? Is that going to be paying up for Royal Marshall at that 117 range, or do you go with a cheaper guy like a Sean Darcy or a Tom De Koning is probably the only other options that you're really looking at, and maybe a Max Flynn, is that his name? Matt Flynn at West Coast there. Those are probably the only couple options there is. I would probably argue that Max Gorn probably should be in that conversation because, again, he potentially could be more expensive than he is at the moment with what he's capable of, if he gets a consistent run at it. And that's the only question mark. Is he is 33 now, heading into a new season, expecting Melbourne to decline, meaning more reliance on him. Does that mean less ball for him? And does that mean he's going to have his scores dropped? And that's what all the things you've got to consider. The only other thing that concerns me is that they have a pretty hard run when it comes to the start of the season. So, he goes Briggs, Cherry, Witts, Stanley, and then Goldstein and Draper. So in the first 5 games. So all of those are pretty tough, particularly Briggs and Witts. Stanley's a bit up and down, and then you've got Goldstein and Draper. If they continue with that dual ruck setup, they were also pretty tough last year. And Cherry, we all know, well, he also gives up a few points, but he can also be quite tough because he just tackles everything that lays in sight. So it's a bit of a tough run and a bit of much to ask, but definitely Max Gorn could be a potential cheaper option for us rather than paying up for top dollar for Marshall. It is definitely something that I'm weighing up when it comes to paying up the Mark line. The next player we all need to talk about, and there's a bit of stuff circulating with him at the moment because he is currently battling a rib injury. And that is Christian Petrarca. He is way down on his 105 average from last year, priced at about 90. It was a very weird year for him where we saw him miss a chunk of game time, particularly the second half, just due to a rib injury. He had a pretty big hit, and then that saw him, I think, had a broken rib, so he was out for the remainder of the season with some complications as well. But when I'm looking into the stats of what he did prior to his injury, that's where it concerns me the most when looking at picking him for 2025. There's a lot of unusual scores. You're looking at the 64, 74, 77, 73. We won't include the 51 because that was the injured game, but those are very unusual scores for the likes of Christian Petrarca. I can even show you the year prior, and you can see that he's very consistent when he does score quite well. Just look at that. There's one score within the 70 range. Everything else is like 90 to 110 sort of zone. So he's much more of a consistent player than what 2024 showed. And my thinking when it comes to this is why has that happened? Is it a combination of Melbourne declining, meaning they're getting less points? Looking at the overall team points, they did drop by over 2,000 points throughout the season, so that is a big factor and something that we do need to consider. Is it just potentially that the on-field issues that we have been aware of? Is he just not happy at the club, and that obviously affects his on-field performances? Is he going to overcome that? That's something that we can't predict. We can't say that he's going to magically just be back to the old Petrarca and be okay, I'm happy back at the club again, because we need our players to be confident. That's when they're at their best scoring wise, that they need to be confident, they need to be right in their body, and they need to be right in their mind. So if he's not all there and he's not committed to where the football club's going, then these are the scores that we can probably expect to see again in 2025. So it's a big watch for me where I want to pick him because he is cheap, and he doesn't have the opening round as well. So that's another big factor for me. But I need to see something. I need to see that he is fit and healthy, and he needs to show that he has some commitment to the football club. And if Melbourne could improve, that would be nice as well, because that means there'll be more points for him. But I'm just not seeing it at the moment. And with this missing a chunk of preseason already, it's not off to a good start for me. So on the back end of my team, but not currently there. Moving on to his teammate Trent Rivers, who I did own for a portion of last year, and I'll tell you, it was horrible. He just didn't do well. But why is he on my watch list? He is priced at 82, 840k-ish, so nothing too crazy. But once Petrarca went down with his injury, that sort of opened the door for Rivers to sort of be tested out in this midfield role. You can see here, his numbers absolutely just went ballistic in the second half. Hadn't had a lick of CBAs all season, and then round 15 came and he was straight in the mid, 80%, just whacked in there. So when he was when he had this midfield role, he averaged about 70%. He averaged about 89, so that you can say he's probably about 7 points undervalued as it is. It was just, I don't know if it was just the lack of experience in the midfield role. We saw some very unusual scores, talking 62, 73, that low one of 41, and then even the 78 to finish off the season. It's just very inconsistent. He had highs of 126, but I don't know if it's going to be a role that sticks for him. Do Melbourne start to just roll back to the classic, Oliver in the middle, Viney and Petrarca, if they're all fit? Then I'd say that's the way they're going to go. They're not going to look to include too many others. They may have a third or a fourth or fifth midfield in, whether they like to include a Harvey Langford in there, or do they go with a Trent Rivers being that fourth? Who knows? Obviously, I think Neil Bullen was sort of that fourth previously. Looking at his numbers, that was sort of up and down, where he had 50%, but then next week would have bloody 80%. So it's really hard to tell. They tried out Salem last year as well. That didn't work out and didn't last too long with his injury concerns. Pickett was also running through there. I think it's safe to say that that experiment should be done. I think he's much better as a forward and he's much damaging there. So fingers crossed that's the way it goes. You got Sparrow that you have to challenge as well with. So it's one on the back end of the list, but is one that we got to keep an eye on just because if it is something that he's going to be taking a midfield role, then he is a defender. He's listed as a defender, and he could be another option for us in what is a struggling year this year in defence. But for now, I don't think there's too much meat on the bone to really be paying up for his price. Now, the man that's probably everyone's been waiting for is Clayton Oliver. If I can spell his name, not Clayton. He is massively selected so far this season. He is 42%, and what I love to do with these highly selected players is really challenge why everyone's selecting them. It seems like, once someone's got a sniff of it, everyone just jumps on, and then they're obviously very highly owned, and then everyone doesn't even think about it. They just, okay, everyone else is doing it, I'm just going to jump on, right? What I like to do is challenge exactly why we're selecting him and really want to get into the depth of, is he actually a good pick? I did the very similar thing with Josh Dunkley back in 2023 when he was like nearly 70% owned because he was moving from the Bulldogs to Brisbane, and everyone thought he would just absolutely go massive. I thought otherwise, looking into his stats a bit more. Moving to a new club, I thought he wouldn't go as well, and to start the season, he didn't. And luckily, I didn't start him, and that's probably one of the major reasons why I ended up going on and winning that year. So this could be a very similar pick in my eyes, that everyone is picking him. He's at 42%. And the way I look at it, yes, he is 40 points unders of his 115 average from 2023, and he could definitely go back to 100 ways quite easily, but there's no statistical data to say that he will. That it's purely based on that you're backing Oliver to overcome his mental demons with the off-field allegations, get into more confidence, get his body right is the other thing as well, to really push back up into the fantasy numbers and become that premium that we all want to see. So that is a concern for me. You can argue one side of the coin, but you can also argue this other side that he's going to do the exact same thing next year. We've seen a good portion of games from him. He played 21 games last year, only missing out the last 2, and he was very inconsistent. He had very lows of 26s and 40s, multiple times throughout the season, and he didn't really show a huge amount of ceiling. Whether that was the fact that his teammates just aren't happy with him, is that a factor that we can't analyze as well? Because he played in the right role. You can look at his overall statistics for the season. His time on ground was a little bit lower, 6%. I wouldn't imagine that's 40% of 40 points worth. And his TBAs were slightly down as well. But that should not be justification for his 40-point drop-off. There is something much more going on in Clayton Oliver's head that he needs to overcome for us to be selected. But we just need to see more. For me, he's not locked into my side. I need to see a lot more throughout the preseason to say that he is back to the old Clayton ways, and he's even in the good books with his teammates, because that's probably one of the bigger things as well. I think he relies a lot on his teammates to pass it to him, where we saw a lot of time last year, it would just go straight over his head just because they didn't want to give it to him. So I like to challenge these sort of play picks. So he is not 100% locked into my side as much as I think it's a good pick, and he is super cheap. He's a premium that's priced at a mid-pricer range at this point in time. So that usually means it's a massive pick, but we have seen these picks fail in the past where that season, the time just comes to an end. Premiums have to fall off eventually, and you only have to look at a couple of years ago, talking about Tom Mitchell. He was averaging 120 for a couple of seasons there, and now where is he? He's gone to Collingwood and is doing nothing. So every premium has a day, and it could potentially be Clayton Oliver's time ending. I'm not saying that at any point, but we've really got to consider that as a possibility, because there's so much going on here that we're just not aware of. And to finish off, I'll talk about two rookies that I am looking at, and that's obviously their pick 6 and pick 11. So we'll start off with Harvey Langford, priced at 325k, so he's a bit more expensive, but he is probably one of the most fantasy relevant rookies that we're going to receive this year. He averaged 119 over 4 games in the under 18 championship, so absolutely racks it up, averaging 25 disposals, 6 marks, and 3 tackles, and even hits the scoreboard every now and then. So he just knows how to get the ball. And even in the Coates Talent League, he averaged, if I can scroll over, a flat 100. And that's again 25, 26 disposals, 5 marks, 5 tackles, and also averaged over a goal. And that was over a 15-game span as well. So absolutely kills it when it comes to accumulating the ball. He also played one VFL game, and that was only for a 49 for Richmond. So probably a bit of pressure going on him there. So I wouldn't count that too much. But like I said, with Neil Bullen exiting to Adelaide, that does open up some CBAs for the likes of Harvey Langford, whether he plays a bit of a mid forward role. What is happening with Petrarca? Does he miss the start of the season, or does he spend more time forward? That's what I would like to see, and I think they would like to throw Harvey Langford, because at some point, if the season isn't going right for Melbourne, they're going to throw the keys to the kids. That's the way I think they have to go, because what's the point of holding on to what you have? You know, Golan's not getting any younger. He's 33. Oliver's, I think, late 20s, and Petrarca is also like nearly 30 as well. So these aging superstars are getting up there. You really got to start handing the reins to the kids at some point before your club's in turmoil pretty quickly. So yeah, I definitely see some time for Harvey Langford to spend in Melbourne side, best 22, quite easily. And same with Xavier there. I'll quickly show you his numbers as well. Even though I think he's less likely to have a start the season, he averaged 104 over 3 games under 18s, and he also averaged 89 in over 12 games in Talent League. So he's also quite fantasy relevant. He does know how to rack up the ball in that same sort of role. So both are big on my watch list, and fingers crossed we will start with one of them throughout the season. Just quickly scan over the best 22. I can't really argue too much about it. You know, they've just gone back to the old ways of Clayton Oliver, Petrarca, and Viney in the midfield. Max Gawn, obviously, in the ruck there. You've got the 2 wingers, and Ed Langdon and Caleb Windsor there. Trent Rivers off the halfback. Christian Salem's also there. Nothing really surprising me here, to be honest. I would really like to see Harvey Langford spend a bit of time in the guts. It's just have to wait and see. So that's really all I had to say about Melbourne. I hope they can improve, because I don't mind Melbourne as a club. They're one of the underdog Victorian clubs, so they're one of the more favourites of mine. So fingers crossed they go well. But that's probably it for today's video. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Talk to you later, guys.
For all the pain.